I am glad to see everyone here, including old, good friends. By tradition, we conclude the high-level week with a meeting with you. We try to answer your questions as transparently and openly as possible. I will not make any long substantive introductory remarks. I hope that you, as journalists, are following what is happening. Our speech has just been delivered in the General Assembly Hall. It outlines the main directions of Russian foreign policy. My main conclusion at this segment of the General Assembly is that it confirms that the world is undergoing a profound transformation. Within its framework, two main processes collide. One is an objective, historically determined process of forming a multipolar world, firmly based on the principle of sovereign equality of states, laid down in the UN Charter. And the second is a group of countries, those who still want to preserve the unipolar world, preserve what we used to call the Golden Billion, and preserve not colonial, but neo-colonial methods, the essence of which is the same to live at the expense of others. There are many examples of this. I have no doubt that you, as journalists, are interested in what is happening and how countries are trying to explain their position and how these words differ or do not differ with deeds. I suggest we move on to the questions and answers.
Ассоциация корреспондентов ООН. Прошу вас.
Thank you, Mr. Foreign.
Благодарю вас, министр иностранных дел, за пресс-конференцию от имени Ассоциации корреспондентов ООН Валерия Ребека. Евросоюз говорит о том, что они уже...
The European Union says it is already in a state of hybrid warfare with Russia. According to NATO, Russia's violations of airspace are a violation of international law. What is your response to these accusations? I'll give you an example. When drones fell on Polish territory, on the same day, as soon as the Poles began to raise the alarm, we offered to hold a meeting through the Russian Ministry of Defense to deal with this situation in a business-like manner, as professionals should, without any hysteria. Look at the wreckage, talk about what kind of drones they are. What kind of range of action? The drones that were allegedly discovered on Polish territory. If these are the ones we are thinking about, then their flight range is less than from the border of the Russian Federation to the border with Poland. I repeat it again. When they walk away from an honest conversation, they blame everything. And when they offer to sit down and figure it out, they say, "No, we don't want to figure it out. You know everything yourself." It's good that you started with this question a year ago, in this very room, at this very table. I told you how we are trying to get the truth about the provocation staged in Bucha in April 2022, when, after the Russian units left the suburbs of Kiev, including a settlement called Bucha, and we left there because Western countries called on us to do so in order to create an atmosphere of trust for the planned signing of a peace agreement on the settlement, which was then disrupted by former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson 2 days later, by a coincidentally happy coincidence. BBC television reporters showed the corpses lying neatly along the main street of Bucha. That is, for 2 days, no one noticed them. And then suddenly they saw the light. This does not happen. I have told you how I have been addressing Secretary General Guterres for almost 3 years. Moreover, we have even sent an official request to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Initially, no one wanted to organize the investigation that we called for. We asked, as a minimum, to publish the names of those whose bodies were shown on the BBC. Secretary General of the United Nations Guterres I talked to him about this topic yesterday, shrugs his shoulders, and says that he cannot do this. Then he said that he had asked, but they had refused him. As I said, we have also contacted the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Officially, in writing a year ago, we received an answer only this summer. It says amazing things. The possibility of disclosing information about victims is being considered jointly with the Office of Legal Affairs of the Secretariat. Then we were informed verbally, however, that the lawyers of the Secretariat had ruled that it was inappropriate to disclose information about the victims in Bucha in order to ensure the safety of their relatives. A year ago, when it was the same as today, at a dead end, I called for your journalistic passion. Aren't you interested in finding out who these people are whose bodies were shown there? What are their names? Who are they? As I understand it, none of you conducted any journalistic investigations afterwards, although such investigations are common for much less high-profile incidents. Returning to the first question, we have nothing to hide. We never attack civilian targets. Incidents do happen, but we never target them. We never direct our drones or missiles at the member states of the European Union and the North Atlantic Alliance located in Europe. One more time, if the Poles really wanted to figure this out, we would have immediately offered a meeting, but no one ever wants to discuss the facts. We are well aware of the examples, when we were accused, and then it turned out that it was the Ukrainians who hit the market, the maternity hospital, and many others. When the noise of the first accusations passes, journalists, including those who raise this noise, do not want to understand these issues. Maybe they're just not allowed, but we are always open to an honest conversation. Yesterday, following a vote, the UN Security Council rejected a draft resolution proposed by Russia and China to extend Resolution 2231 on the Iranian nuclear program for 6 months. What consequences do you see from the resumption of sanctions against Iran? Do you still consider it possible to resolve the issue of Iran's nuclear program through diplomatic means? If so, what further steps does Russia plan to take? The mechanism for restoring sanctions was laid down in UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which approved the Iranian nuclear deal in 2015. This was done following direct talks between Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif and the Secretary of State Kerry.
Вот этот механизм, так называемого снэпбэка, он не характерен для любых других санкционных режимов. И
this snapback mechanism is not typical for other sanctions regimes. In fact, he allowed any country to put to the vote a resolution on the continued operation of the sanctions relief regime. A country with the right of veto could even block such a resolution alone. This would mean that there is no extension of the lifting of sanctions. To considerations, first of all, it's not very elegantly worded. This was done with the sole purpose of constantly holding the Iranian colleagues by the throat, not allowing them to take a step to the left or a step to the right. Secondly, Iran agreed to this exotic mechanism solely because it was confident that it would never violate this deal itself. Therefore, they say, for God's sake, let this mechanism hang us something spare. But Iran was not going to, and is not going to violate this at the moment. So they agreed to it with a light heart, as it seemed to them. They could not even imagine that the deal would be ruined not by them, but by the United States in 2018. But it happened. The United States withdrew from this deal and stated that it would not recognize this resolution. Instead of demanding a return to fulfilling its responsibilities, Europe also began to deviate from its commitment to these agreements. This continuous series of violations is well known. So from the resolution, which the United States does not recognize, everything that the Europeans need is taken, and they need this exotic mechanism for the return of sanctions. What did they do? It's impossible to even explain it in human language. It's a trap. This paradox was created as a trap for Iran. This is further confirmation that Iran has not intended and is not going to violate the requirements of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and this nuclear deal. Nevertheless, the next Iranian government has already fallen into this trap, inherited since 2015. Together with the People's Republic of China, we did everything to give diplomacy a chance, even after this resolution on the resumption of the sanctions regime was adopted. There was a chance to agree to extend the Iranian nuclear deal in full for a certain period. We wanted for 3 months, without adding or deleting anything, so that it would continue to operate in all its aspects, for a period during which, we hoped, negotiations could continue. Since the West disrupted it and blackmailed the majority of the Security Council members, so that they would also support its destructive position, I do not know now how the Islamic Republic of Iran will react. This is an absolute lack of negotiability in all areas, not to give 2 or 3 months for Iran to be able to obtain conditions for further work with both the IAEA and the United States during the negotiations. Iran was ready and is still ready for dialogue, even if not directly, but indirectly. Iran regularly communicated with the European Troika, but the outcome of this communication confirms only one thing. From the very beginning, the European Troika needed to find some reason to return the sanctions regime. Therefore, all the good faith proposals of our Iranian colleagues on compromises were rejected. When something was announced that, they say, there was hope for agreement, new demands appeared immediately the next morning. This is a deliberate operation, with embarking on the next stage of strangling the Islamic Republic of Iran economically, financially, and so on. What you write periodically, and political scientists mention it, is that the threat of new attacks on Iran persists and, as someone in the know reports, is even being discussed in practical terms, which is also quite revealing. All this is synchronized, both the military threat and the measures of economic strangulation. It is sad. This means only one thing. Western countries don't give a damn. As we say, Security Council resolutions. There are a lot of examples of Iran, Kosovo, and the Minsk agreements on Ukraine. A couple of days ago, after meeting with President Zelensky, as President Trump said that he believed that Ukraine could take back all the territories, you have met with the Secretary of State Rubio. As we have heard, you have had constructive talks. Given the constantly changing policies of our American colleagues, how does Russia plan to work with the United States, especially with the Trump administration, on this issue? This can be called an ever-changing, flexible policy. You see, every state, and especially every leader, has its own style of doing business in the international arena, as well as at home. We really appreciate that the United States understands the most important thing. It is fundamentally wrong when states refuse to even talk to each other, as the Europeans and Biden did during their rule. In such times, when there are many events of global, epical significance, it is simply criminal not to talk to each other. We appreciate that the Trump administration offered to resume our dialogue from the very beginning. We have resumed it, back in February of this year, at a meeting with us Secretary of State Rubio, and in a telephone conversation between Russian President Putin and us President Trump. We immediately stated that we recognize that Russia, the United States, and all other countries have national interests. Their promotion is the right of every state. In those cases, once again, at a meeting with the Secretary of State Rubio on September 25th, we fixed this philosophy with him, when interests coincide and, of course, there are few such cases in relations between the United States and Russia. It would be foolish to use this circumstance to implement some mutually beneficial joint projects, whether in energy, in space, anywhere. And in those cases, the majority of them, when the interests of Russia and the United States do not coincide, the main thing is to prevent this from escalating into a clash, into a confrontation, especially into a hot one. We have an absolutely unified position here. In diplomacy, as you know, and above all in public diplomacy, a lot can be said based on the specifics of the moment. We have a lot of moments, and the specifics of each of them are changing. We do not see any deviation by the United States from the course of conducting an open, honest dialogue with the Russian Federation, as well as with China, as well as with a number of other countries with which the United States has disagreements and contradictions, and a different vision of how to continue to trade and conduct economic affairs. This is exactly what diplomacy is, when conflicting interests need to be reconciled and arranged in such a way as to avoid confrontation. When some of our European colleagues turn diplomacy into either courting their comrades from Washington so that they continue to play war on Biden, or they replace diplomacy with sanctions, this is a hopeless path. He won't have any success. But an honest dialogue on any issues, we see the readiness of the United States for this. We are also ready for it. At the same time, diplomatic comments can be very different.
Thank you.
Благодарю вас, министр Лавров, CNBC, Турция. Президент Трамп публично попросил президента Эрдогана.
US President Trump has publicly asked Turkish President Erdogan to stop buying oil and gas from Russia. Do you expect Ankara to continue purchasing your raw materials? Turkey once bought S-400 air defense systems from Russia. You said last year that Turkey is an end user and cannot sell them to a third country. What can you say about this? I don't want to guess at both the first and second questions. I want to confirm what I always say about Turkey and any of our other partners. We respect the position of the Republic of Turkey. We have no doubt that the Republic of Turkey respects itself and its people. Next month, Russia will preside over the Security Council. Please tell me, what will your work focus on? Every month, issues that result from previous resolutions automatically appear on the agenda of the Security Council, and they usually involve a periodic review of how these resolutions are being implemented. The Secretariat distributes in advance a list of topics that need to be heard, discussed and, possibly, given some additional instructions on the implementation of relevant decisions in a given month. In particular, our presidency will consider the implementation of the Dayton agreements on Bosnia and Herzegovina. This will happen in a timely manner, because the situation there is critical. A course has been set for their collapse. For the infringement of the rights of the Serbian people, there are gross violations of the Dayton Accords, which proclaim the equality of the three state-forming peoples, Serbs, Croats and Bosniaks. So it will be an interesting event. Perhaps the most important thing is that our presidency marks the anniversary date of October 24. It is the United Nations Day of Education. We plan to hold a special meeting on this day, not to once again express support for the principles laid down by the Founding Fathers in the UN Charter, but to see how they should be implemented today. Moreover, the vast majority of these principles relate directly to the processes of multipolarity. The sovereign equality of states, non-interference in each other's affairs, the right of nations to self-determination, the right of peoples to determine their own destiny. All this has been enshrined in the UN Charter for all these 80 years, but has not always been fulfilled. This will be a meeting with an eye to analysis and preferably a practical conclusion on how to further develop the UN.
Благодарю вас, господин министр. Аль-Кудс Аль-Араби. Господин министр, ваш посол здесь очень хорошо выступает в Совете Безопасности.
Your ambassador speaks eloquently in the Insecurity Council about the genocidal war in the Gaza Strip. He's based on facts and speaks bluntly, stating the strong position of the Russian Federation. But could Russia do more than just provide facts and speak eloquently? Second, on May 20, 2024, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for 2 Israeli war criminals. To this day, the crimes continue, the genocide continues. There are no charges against other Israeli war criminals, ministers, etc. I've seen a lot of my Arab friends over the past few days. We talked about Palestine, but not only about the West Bank of the Jordan River, southern Lebanon, southern Syria, Yemen, and much more. The situation is extremely explosive. This is a series of mines, not even in slow motion, but already with the fuses blown. Someone might accidentally step on them. You are asking what Russia can do. Apart from stating its principled position on Palestine at meetings of the UN Security Council, do you represent the Arab media?
Совсем недавно состоялся саммит Лиги арабских государств и Организации исламского сотрудничества. На этом саммите шло обсуждение того.
Most recently, the summit of the League of Arab States and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation was held. At this summit, there was a discussion about the atrocities taking place in the Gaza Strip. The collective punishment of the Palestinian people continues, which is no better than the terrorist attacks that we all condemn. Collective punishment is prohibited by international humanitarian law. If our Arab and Muslim friends are doing some work at the end of this summit, and the result of this work will be of practical importance in order to try to stop what is happening, we will definitely join in. You Arabs are directly bordered by Palestine, by Israel. First of all, it affects you. Almost all Arab and Muslim countries are our close friends. We want to help you, but first of all, the countries of the region should determine their actions. I know that Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the UAE are participating in such trust-based negotiations. The United States is helping in this process. There are a lot of rumors right now that some kind of agreement is looming. US President Trump said that the denouement is near. We are not yet aware of what is meant. We've all read the speculation about the 21-point plan. There's something similar to collective management. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair is referred to as the Governor-General of the Gaza Strip. According to rumors appearing in the media space, someone wants to give reservations or Bantustans, as it was in South Africa during the apartheid period, a respectable shape. I'm commenting without subscribing to something. I'm just mentioning the rumors. Since you asked what Russia can do, the process is underway. If the countries participating in the process, primarily the Arab countries, and the Palestinians themselves see any role or contribution that Russia could make, then we would definitely be told about it. Given the statements from various sides that were made, including here at the General Assembly. Can Zelensky expect to return to the borders of 2022? What is the current situation on the ground in the DPR, in particular in the strategic triangle?
Ну, знаете, насчет границ 2022 года.
As for the borders of 2022, no one is counting on them anymore, because to expect a return to these borders would be political blindness and a complete misunderstanding of what is happening.
И полным непониманием того, что происходит.
Russia defends its legitimate interests, the legitimate interests of people who, after seizing power through a coup d'état, the Nazis in Kiev declared terrorists, inhumans, creatures whose children, through the mouth of the then President of Ukraine Poroshenko, threatened to rot in basements, while the children of the Ukrainian elite would drive beautiful cars, go to schools and eat sweets. Forget about it.
Вот эти все разговоры о возвращении к границам каких-то лет, они же ведут давно. Есть и все эти разговоры связаны с тем, что украинские руководители.
All these talks about returning to the borders of some years have been going on for a long time. All of them are related to the fact that the Ukrainian leaders, who came to power after February 2014 by legal means, constantly lied and disrupted all agreements that had been reached over the years. If the signed agreement between the then president and the opposition, guaranteed by Germany, France and Poland, had been implemented in February 2014, Ukraine would now be within the borders of 1991. Then they would not have rebelled in Crimea, refusing to recognize the illegal government, because it would not have appeared. Then the war started. Those who did not recognize the illegal government were bombed and burned in their homes by the Kiev regime, as was the case in Odessa, where about 50 people were burned alive. Planes bombed Lugansk, and artillery shelled the territories. It is strictly forbidden to use the army in an internal conflict. You know yourself that this is also a violation of international humanitarian law. A year later, the Minsk agreements were reached. If they, guaranteed by Germany and France and approved by the Security Council, had been fulfilled by the top of the Kiev regime, Ukraine would have been within the borders of 1991 minus Crimea, because a referendum was held in Crimea. No one argues with this. To be honest, in 2014, the then Secretary of State Kerry told me that we should forget about Crimea. They say, let's talk about Donbas. They ripped it off. Ukraine has shrunk a little more. If we had fulfilled the agreements that Ukraine proposed in April 2022, to which we agreed, it would have been within the borders of 1991 minus Crimea, and a larger part of Donbas. Kiev thwarted this, too, and refused to carry out its initiative. We are not talking about any borders of 2022. We are talking about the borders stipulated in the Constitution of the Russian Federation. As for the situation in the DPR, in particular in the strategic triangle, how would you describe him? I will not comment on the situation on the battlefield. First of all, we have been here for several days now. Secondly, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation does this quite regularly. Military personnel report on the development of the situation. I'll leave it to them. I will try to make sure that you answer the question in English. President of the USA Trump called Russia a paper tiger and said European countries should shoot down Russian planes if they violate European airspace. Do you consider this a provocation? What happens if a Russian plane is shot down? We are in the UN building. Russian is the official language here, as is English. Therefore, I am grateful to all of you for respecting our right to use this language. Not all the statements can be followed, but I remember that the day after the term paper tiger was uttered, as President Trump was asked if he still considered Russia a paper tiger, he replied in the negative. If we give answers to every nuance in rhetoric, I have already answered a question about what I think about certain statements made by us President Trump. A wide variety of tools, methods and techniques are used in public diplomacy. The same applies to claims that Trump allowed the bombing of the Russian Federation, shooting down planes, drones. When a drone is not flying over our territory, if it has crossed someone's border, but has left our airspace, then everyone has the right to do with it what they consider necessary to ensure their safety. If there are attempts to shoot down or hit any flying object over our territory, in our airspace, then these people will seriously regret if they commit such a gross violation of our territorial integrity and sovereignty. The German authorities do not hide the fact that they are actively militarizing their country. Why do you think this is being done? What are they going to achieve? You have repeatedly spoken about the privatization of the entire and leadership by the West. What can Russia do to change this situation? As for the militarization of Germany, we have repeatedly expressed our deep concern. There is not only a process of militarization going on there, but there are clear signs of renationalization. Why is this done? With the same goal that Hitler had to subjugate the whole of Europe and try to inflict a strategic defeat in the case of Hitler, the Soviet Union, in the case of modern Germany, and the choir of the main soloists of the European Union and NATO. This is the Russian Federation. They keep saying that. German Chancellor Merz said again yesterday that we are not at war yet, but we are no longer at peace. The militaristic rhetoric is increasing every day. His famous expression, which he has already used more than once, is that he broke through amendments to the Constitution, and now more money can be spent on armaments, the development of military infrastructure and capabilities.
As German Chancellor F. Merz proudly announced, his goal is to once again make Germany the main military machine in Europe. When a person in a country that has committed the crimes of Nazism, fascism, the Holocaust, and genocide says that Germany needs to become a great military power again, he has an atrophy of historical memory. It's dangerous.
I've been honest about it. We don't hide it. Many positions at the Undersecretary General level are scattered across different countries located on different continents. But there are several positions that directly affect the functioning of the UN Secretariat and the decisions it makes for the approval of the member states. When the UN Secretariat recommends something, member countries are usually tempted to support it. We have the UN Secretary General, a citizen of a NATO member country, the Director of the Department of Political Affairs and Peacebuilding, a citizen of a NATO member country, the Director of the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, a citizen of a NATO member country, the Director of the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, which handles operations around the world and is a very influential structure, a citizen of a member country, NATO, specifically Britain. The Director of the Security Department, which is also important for organizing the work of the entire UN system, is also a citizen of a NATO member country. He mentioned that the British inherited the head of the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. UN Secretary General Guterres has put forward the UN 80 initiative, which contains many radical proposals. They require deep study and analysis. There must be an analysis that is transparent and in which all member countries will participate. We have initiated a corresponding resolution. She was approved so that this process would not go in the dark again.
UN Secretary General Guterres has appointed another Deputy Secretary General to lead this process. By a happy coincidence, he also became a British citizen. Aren't key positions areas of work that should be distributed more evenly among member countries? I think it's obvious. At the last session of the UN General Assembly, I spoke about the need to reform the principles on which the formation of the Secretariat is based. Now the main principle is how many people there are. What is the GDP per capita? Something like that. The bigger you are, the more places you get. There's probably a logic to this. But there is also the principle of the sovereign equality of states, which has been mentioned many times today and these days. The UN Secretariat should be accepted not by looking around at the factor of nationality, but by working qualities, necessarily observing the principle of fair geographical representation. Currently, this principle is absolutely not respected in the upper echelon of the Secretariat.
Thank you so much.
Благодарю вас. Спасибо, министр Лавров. Я представляю ВИАН, Индия.
India continues to buy Russian oil, despite the fact that the United States insists that these imports be reduced. How do you view the relationship with India in this context? What does this fact mean for the relations between India and Russia? I cannot consider such situations between India and the United States, between India and any other country, as a criterion of relations between India and the Russian Federation. In our country, they have long been called strategic partnership relations. At some stage, Indian friends suggested adding this term. The relationship became known as the relationship of privileged strategic partnership. A little later, Indian friends offered another clarification. These relations are now called relations of a particularly privileged strategic partnership. We fully respect India's national interests and the foreign policy pursued by Indian Prime Minister Modi to advance his national interests. We have regular contacts at the highest level. Recently, Prime Minister Modi and Russian President Putin met in Tianjin, China, at the SCO summit. Russian President Putin is preparing a state visit to New Delhi in December. We have a huge, rich bilateral agenda: trade, economics, finance, military technical cooperation, humanitarian contacts, healthcare, high technologies, artificial intelligence. We have close coordination in the international arena within the SCO, BRICS, and through bilateral channels. This year, my colleague, Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar, I spoke with him yesterday, visited Russia, and I will visit India. There are regular exchanges. I'm not even asking our Indian colleagues what will happen to our trade and oil. They decide everything perfectly for themselves. My friend Jaishankar publicly said, answering a similar question, that if the United States wants to sell its oil to us, we are ready to discuss on what terms. But what we buy from other countries, not from the United States, but from Russia, is already our business. They are not part of the Indian-American agenda. I think this is a worthy response, showing that India, like Turkey, respects itself. Recently, there's been more and more talk about the difficulties that delegations that come to the UN General Assembly have to face. The Russian delegation has repeatedly dealt with problems when it comes to obtaining visas. This year, Palestinian leader Abbas was unable to attend the UN General Assembly in person. How do you assess the legality of such actions on the part of the United States, given that the UN headquarters is located in New York? How would you comment on the increasingly frequent calls to move this headquarters to another country? This is a serious topic. It is an inconvenience that countries whose delegations are facing problems are suffering. This is a serious violation of the agreement between the UN headquarters and the host country. The host country is obliged to issue visas to all UN events in a timely manner, without discrimination, at the request of the country on the eve of the session, be it the General Assembly or other UN bodies. We regularly miss the members of our delegation, including those from the State Duma. The Russian president includes parliamentarians in his delegation. Not everyone gets a visa. I mentioned this at a meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Rubio on September 24. The Americans considered another employee of our ministry at the department director level not worthy of issuing a visa.
Между штаб-квартирой ООН и страной-хозяйкой.
This is not the only violation of the agreement between the UN headquarters and the host country. One of the most striking violations is the seizure of our diplomatic property during the Obama administration. He did this a couple of weeks before Trump's inauguration, back in his first term. It's dishonorable when you want to, quote, trash someone who will replace you in the White House in accordance with the law, the Constitution, and the will of the people. He left him such a, quote, legacy. So far, we have not been able to unpack it. The Americans lack the willingness to return to the honest implementation of agreements. But our dialogue is ongoing about visas, about the functioning of embassies, about this property, and about other aspects of the daily functioning of our diplomatic mission. 2 rounds have already been held. Rubio and I have agreed to hold the 3rd round this fall. Let's discuss it further.
Да, наверное, многие не прочь недавно вот еще кто-то.
As for the move, many people don't mind. Recently, President Petro of Colombia had his visa revoked while he was here. He is a simple, straightforward man. Many suggested starting to think about it. It seems to me that these proposals were purely polemical in order to raise the issue more aggressively in the UN Committee on Relations with the host country. There is such a legend. When there were negotiations between Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill, during which the need to create a world organization was mentioned for the first time, Stalin actively touted the UN headquarters in Sochi. The city of Sochi has proven that it can host major events. If such a decision is suddenly made, then the Olympic infrastructure there is ready. All employees of the UN Secretariat will be comfortable doing sports.
Thank you, sir.
Благодарю вас, господин министр, благодарю вас. India.
U.S. President Trump is threatening sanctions against countries that purchase Russian oil. Do you have any concrete steps that Russia is proposing to India in order to save the economic partnership that you have with India? In your conversation with U.S. Secretary of State Rubio, did you discuss India? The answer to the second question is no. In principle, we are not in the habit of discussing anyone, especially our friends, in contacts with third countries. As for the oil issue, I have already answered it to your colleague from the Indian media. You have formulated your question. Is there any way to save the economic partnership between Russia and India? I don't have any doubts. It's not under threat. No one is trying to kill him. And if anyone is going to take such steps, the Indian Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister have explained everything. India chooses its own partners. If the United States has a proposal on how to increase bilateral trade between the United States and India, they are ready to discuss the conditions that the Americans will offer. But New Delhi is ready to discuss trade, investment, economic, and military technical relations between India and third countries only with those in question. There is information that Kyiv is preparing another provocation already on the territory of the European Union to attack the NATO countries, Romania and Poland, under a false flag, and as a result blame Russia for everything. What, in your opinion, could be the consequences? Will we be proactive in our information work? Will it work?
This is not the first time. I have no doubt that all these reports have the most reliable foundation. The Kyiv regime has special structures both in the media space and in the military technical sphere that are engaged in provocations, as you said, under a false flag.
I read that they are now taking drones of our production, which they also have there, and equipping them in such a way that there is no doubt that we launched them. But in the West, in addition to those who throw tantrums in Poland, Estonia, the Baltic states as a whole, and in a number of other countries, in serious capitals, it seems to me there are serious people who understand everything perfectly. Another thing is that in these serious capitals, the elites are committed to the goal of suppressing Russia. They no longer say, inflict a strategic defeat, but assert something else. But the goal of strategic defeat is constantly in their heads. They will modify how this defeat should look, but that's exactly what they're doing. I know for sure that the British are helping Ukrainians in all these dirty tricks, as they've been doing for many centuries in our geopolitical space. We are well aware of this. We have military intelligence, and the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service periodically shows the true face of those who try to concoct such provocations. What the answer will be is that it's not very promising to guess now, but if they start taking any physical steps, they will seriously regret it. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said more than once that we will not allow any violation of our territories or our airspace by those in Europe who are openly preparing a war against us.
Благодарю вас, Мария. Что касается Ирана, механизмами санкций.
As for Iran and the mechanism of sanctions, you've already talked about this. How difficult and how easy is it to restore sanctions against Iran? Is it easy to create a sanctions committee and elect the chairman of this committee? As for the UN's multilateral system, which is currently suffering a severe blow, you've worked in New York for quite a long time yourself, and you know this system better. I have sent a letter to the UN Secretary General in which I clearly stated our position. A corresponding statement from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs will be distributed today, that the decision that was inspired and staged yesterday is legally null and void, illegal and unenforceable. If the Secretary General is committed to the UN Charter, including articles on his duties and powers, but follows the path of recognizing this illegal action in the UN Security Council on September 26th and servicing this procedure by creating secretariat structures, then this will be a huge mistake and will cause even greater damage to the authority of the Secretary General and his entourage.
Thank you. Благодарю вас.
Yes, this is a figure of speech, an attack on the multilateral system. That's the way it is. And there's not even much to comment on here. The resolution, which was adopted by consensus and which was grossly violated by the United States, France, and Britain, has now been dragged into the light of day and declared that Iran, not themselves, is violating this resolution. Of course, this is an attack not only on the multilateral system as a whole, but on the UN system, on the prerogatives of its Security Council, on the rules of decency, which include implementing the decisions of the UN Security Council, and not changing them for their own selfish purposes, including those related to interference in internal affairs and the illegal use of force.
Министр Лавров, благодарю вас за то, что вы прибыли сюда, за то, что ведете длинный разговор с журналистами СМИ из иракского Курдистана. Мы
see that the wave of recognition of the Palestinian right to self-determination is growing. Of course, the Palestinians deserve to have their own country. But the Iraqi Kurds held a referendum, you may remember. Practically no country has recognized the results of this referendum. The international community almost unanimously opposed the will of the people. Why then was the will of the people ignored? Is there some kind of double standard here? And my second question concerns the oil deal. These two issues are closely related. The fact that an agreement on oil has been reached again between Baghdad and Erbil means only one thing. Kurds and Arabs in Iraq can negotiate. We are very happy about this. I spoke with the Iraqi foreign minister. We communicate regularly with the leadership of the Kurdish Autonomous Region. We are satisfied that things are getting better for the Kurds and the central authorities. We do not want the Kurdish problem to explode, because not all Kurdish structures have peaceful plans and wishes. Given the large number of Kurds living in a number of countries in the region, there are those who want to blow up this Kurdish problem. But the Middle East may not be able to withstand another such major explosion. Therefore, we are in favor of appeasing everyone. But without establishing dialogue and without developing national consensus in the countries of the region, including those countries where there are Kurds, be it Iraq, Syria, or Iran, they will simply fall apart. Perhaps someone will say that this is the right of nations to self-determination. You don't have a war, so you can negotiate under these conditions. Both Erbil and Baghdad have proved this. We actively support this process. On the eve of the high-level week, President Putin said that Russia will continue to comply with the provisions of the SNV treaty next year. Was this topic discussed during the negotiations with Rubio? Did you see any reaction to this initiative on the sidelines of the General Assembly? This initiative was launched just a day before the opening of the General Assembly. I confirmed it again today in my speech at the plenary session. We are distributing the full text of Russian President Putin's statement of September 22 as a document of the UN Security Council and the General Assembly. I am sure that when this high-level fuss of the week subsides, when everyone is busy with their delegations from the capitals, assessments will begin to arrive. We have already seen the reaction. White House spokeswoman Leavitt responded, saying that this was an interesting statement and that President Trump would definitely comment on it personally. We proceed from this. The Wall Street Journal reported that Trump had notified Zelensky of his readiness to lift restrictions on Ukraine's use of American-made long-range weapons to strike Russia. Did U.S. Secretary of State Rubio warn you about this possibility during the negotiations? Do you suppose that this is really the case? What steps will Russia take? I don't like guessing. You quoted the Wall Street Journal. And the New York Times wrote that Zelensky begged for long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles, but Trump did not give them to him. Therefore, it is not very beneficial to respond to every newspaper line. We proceed from the fact that all our experience of communicating with American colleagues, including at the highest level, suggests that they want to help end this conflict by taking into account and eliminating its root causes. There are no other countries in the Western camp that take this position. I have no doubt that the U.S. president is genuinely interested in this. Another thing is that they are trying to influence him. The Europeans are literally hanging on his hands. Zelensky has now begun to boast that President Trump understands him better now than he understands President Putin. There are many people who want to sparkle on the international stage. I would not react to every such line or sentence.
Не желает вести переговоры с Россией в этом контексте.
You said that Ukraine does not want to negotiate with Russia. In this context, what is the way to end this conflict? How does Russia interpret the U.S. military threats against Venezuela in the Caribbean? What risks does this pose for regional security and stability? Regarding the second question, this is much more relevant now. We are certainly alarmed by what the Americans have now organized in international waters, but around the territorial waters of Venezuela. I spoke yesterday with Venezuelan Foreign Minister Hill and with many other representatives of the Latin American region and the Caribbean. Brazilians and island nations such as St. Vincent and the Grenadines are very worried. Today, I met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nicaragua, Moncada. The situation is really serious. There are already significant naval forces there, including a nuclear submarine. Against this background, there are direct threats of military intervention to destroy drug cartels and wage a general war on drug trafficking. On the same days in the UN Security Council, our American colleagues, together with Panama, are promoting a resolution on the transformation of the International Security Assistance Force in Haiti into an international anti-banditry force. Moreover, a very specific mandate is being requested. They want the UN Security Council to approve the creation of such forces, leaving their formation at the discretion of those who would be interested in it. The mandate will be to use unlimited force against these gangs. There are no deadlines for this operation and no reporting system to the UN Security Council. If we compare these two processes in the Security Council and what is currently afoot around Venezuela, I do not rule out that some creative figures will come up with a mandate from the UN Security Council and then say that bandits from Haiti are hiding in Venezuela. We stand in solidarity with the people and the government of Venezuela. They have every right to determine their political, economic, and social course. We believe that interference in internal affairs is unacceptable, just like in the internal affairs of any other country. This, again, is a requirement of the UN Charter. About negotiations with Ukraine, I asked my staff to prepare material on how Kyiv's position on negotiations has evolved. On April 17, 2022, immediately after the Ukrainians disrupted the agreements they themselves had proposed, when the British forbade them to do so, Zelensky said, "We can fight Russia for 10 years. Our society does not want us to continue negotiations." On October 1st, 2022, Zelensky suddenly declares that Ukraine is ready to negotiate with Russia, but with a different president, not Putin. On March 22, 2023, his then Foreign Minister, Kuleba, when the illegal International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant against the president of Russia, says, "We knew long before that it was pointless to talk to Putin. Our National Security Council of Ukraine has made a decision stating that any negotiations with Putin are impossible." These are the same people who, a year later, started saying that Putin was running away from them. On May 4, 2023, Zelensky declared, "For us, the result is exceptionally specific sentences for all Russian war criminals, including the top leadership of the aggressor country." In May 2023, his advisor Podolyak noted, "Ukraine hates you. We will persecute you always and everywhere. There is nothing to talk about with you. You do not understand human language. Ukraine will get each of you, and it does not matter how, legally or physically." These guys are now claiming that we don't want to talk to them. Zelensky said in 2024 that Russia can start negotiations with us only if they withdraw from our legitimate territories. This is again returning to the topic of the borders of 1991. Then we were tortured for a long time, a truce without any conditions. And when Zelensky held talks with French President Macron a year ago, he said, "There was a lot of information in the media today that I came to talk about a ceasefire." No, it's not like that. Ukraine is not considering the possibility of a ceasefire in exchange for guarantees from Western countries. This is not a topic for discussion, no truces. What they're saying now is that they need an immediate truce and guarantees from Western countries. And then he didn't even want to talk about guarantees. Therefore, judge for yourself what kind of people are who are led by a character like Zelensky. Your meeting with representatives of the member states of the Confederation of Sahel States took place on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. How effective and timely do you see such a format? The second question. France has suspended its cooperation with Mali in the fight against terrorism amid a diplomatic crisis, and the French media publishes materials sympathetic to terrorists and separatists. In your opinion, what is the reason for such a policy in Paris? Is this revenge for Bamako's sovereign choice, or a response to rapprochement with Russia? You answered the second question yourself. Of course that's the way it is. Ukrainian specialists who supply drones to various militant groups and train them are also tied up there. This information is confirmed. As for the meeting with the ministers of the Confederation of Sahel States, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, it took place for the second time. We met in April in Moscow. We will continue this practice, including in the region. We discussed all the plans that we currently have following the results of the summit meetings, following the recent visit to these countries by our delegation led by Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Novak, with the participation of representatives of the Ministries of Economy, Energy, and other structures of the economic bloc. There are good plans for joint projects in the field of natural resources, energy, including nuclear energy, plans for humanitarian cooperation, as well as military and military technical cooperation. These countries need help. We also talked about the need to build bridges between them and the economic community of West African countries. They are neighbors. They still need to exist together. Also, in our contacts with the ECOWAS countries and with the African Union, we emphasize the need to ensure the full participation of this troika in the work of both the African Union and relevant regional integration structures.